All right, so after that recent terrorist attack by ISIS-K at the Kabul airport, Joe Biden came out and he gave a speech where he was basically threatening the people who conducted the terrorist attack and said this. He said, "We will hunt you down, we will find you, we will not forgive you, and we will kill you." And so, listen, in a time like this where 13 American servicemen and women had just been killed by ISIS, a lot of people were giving him a lot of credit and saying, wow, this is a really firm statement. He looks strong in this. Maybe we're going to actually go and hunt down some of these members of ISIS who you could argue deserve to die, right? I mean, these are actual terrorists who do pose an imminent threat to not only American servicemen, but also innocent civilians, right? Again, dozens and dozens of innocent Afghan civilians were killed in that recent terrorist attack. So it would be nice if we actually had weapons capabilities or intelligence capabilities that allowed us to legitimately go and target singular members of ISIS who are an imminent threat and conduct these airstrikes against them. Unfortunately, that is not how our drone program works. That is not how it has ever worked. And if you know anything about the statistics regarding the U.S. drone program, which we are actually going to get to in this video, then you would know that oftentimes when they say we are going to hunt you down and talking to ISIS fighters, what they actually mean is we are going to hunt you down and basically obliterate anybody who happens to stand in our way. And in this case, it seems as though Joe Biden, with his recent retaliatory strike against this member of ISIS, has killed upwards of 10 members of the same innocent Afghan family, including up to 6 children. So we're going to get to the details here, but understand as well, there was this detail that came out in the wake of the terrorist attack. So originally, when we got the reports of the explosion at the Kabul airport, they were saying there were a couple suicide bombers. There were also shooters who were standing by. Now, it turns out, according to eyewitness reports on the ground, that many of those shooters that we were talking about, that we were led to believe by U.S. military intelligence, were ISIS fighters, actually turned out to be U.S. military personnel themselves. Okay, so eyewitnesses told the BBC that significant numbers of the dead in the Kabul airport attack were actually shot by the U.S. forces, and there are also reports that there were civilian casualties, including the deaths of children in the U.S. airstrike that we are about to talk about right now. So, again, in the chaos of this, right, there is no excuse to then go and shoot innocent civilians, right? An analogy that I've heard that I think is apt in this moment is, think about domestically, right? And I know that it's overseas and it's, people who don't necessarily look like you. And so it's hard for a lot of conservatives and liberals in this case to recognize the humanity of these people. But understand an analogy of what if this were to happen domestically, right? It would be as if there was a mass shooting event, right? Where there's some crazy person with a gun at some whatever concert or festival, and they start shooting people. And there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of chaos. And imagine if US cops then showed up to that situation and began to summarily start shooting into the crowd indiscriminately and killing excess people who were not actually even being shot by the original mass shooter, but just contributed to the death and suffering. That's what this would be like in a domestic sense. And so there are no excuses for just saying, oh, well, it was a chaotic situation. No, every single one of these US members of the US military who ended up killing innocent civilians in this chaotic mess that was that recent terrorist attack should be held fully accountable for those murders, okay? They are just that, they are murders. There is no excuse to kill innocent bystanders, even if you are in the midst of a terrorist attack. And so now let's get to the actual airstrike that happened. So, U.S. drone attack kills at least 10 Afghan civilians, including 6 children. So, a U.S. drone strike purportedly targeting a suspected ISIS-K vehicle in a residential neighborhood in Kabul, Afghanistan, killed at least 10 members of a single family, including 6 children, as they were getting out of their car on Sunday. Relatives of the victims told the Washington Post that the strike, which was the second attack the U.S. carried out in Kabul over the weekend, hit a nearby vehicle that the Pentagon claims was an imminent threat, and the civilian victims of the U.S. strike were, quote, all from a single extended family, according to the Post. And Samim Shayad, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, a 25-year-old journalist student, told the New York Times that the U.S. attack killed his father, his 2 brothers, 4 of his young cousins, his niece and his sister's fiance. And Shayad had added that 3 of the younger victims were girls who were just 2 years old or younger. And, quote, the American aircraft target us. He said, I do not know what to say. They just cut my arms and broke my back. I cannot say anything more. And one neighbor at the scene of the attack said in an interview with CNN that, quote, not much is left of their house and nothing can be recognized. They are in pieces. The person estimated that as many as 20 people may have been killed in the U.S. drone strike. So that's the situation, okay? This is what the actual this is what it looks like on the ground in terms of what our precision airstrikes actually look like when they are implemented, right? So this has been emblematic of the entire war, right? There was a period, as they are going to get to in a statistic down here, where Obama's drone strike over a period of about 5 months was killing 90% unintended targets. And so, when you take statistics like this into account and you understand the history of the U.S. drone program, particularly in Afghanistan, you understand that in many cases, we are not targeting terrorists necessarily, but we are the terrorists. I mean, there's a reason why many Afghan civilians, fear going outside on a sunny day, in fear that their family or themselves could be targeted randomly by a U.S. drone strike that then U.S. military commanders come out and say, oh, well, they were a terrorist or they were associated with terrorists, basically wiping out their humanity or any due that they might have to any sort of judicial process or any sort of actual guarantee that they are some terrorists, right? It's this mindset of the U.S. military to not really care where the line is between who's a member of the terrorist group and who just happens to be an innocent Afghan civilians who's in the vicinity and maybe in the way of our drones as they are rampaging through some of these areas. And so this is just another example, yet again, of what this war has looked like for the people of Afghanistan throughout its entire duration, okay? So when people talk about the chaos unfolding as we leave Afghanistan, understand this is the type of chaos that has existed for the entirety of the war. So, people who are coming out and they're saying, well, the recent chaos at the airport justifies further military intervention and action in the country. This is going to be the result of further military action in the country, okay? So just another piece of evidence emphasizing that we need to be getting out as soon as possible. So now let's get to those statistics on the U.S. drone program. So despite officials' claims that the drone assassination program is highly precise and targeted at militants, U.S. strikes have killed hundreds of Afghan civilians in recent years, and according to documents leaked by former Air Force intelligence analyst Daniel Hale, who was sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison last month, and we've talked about him on the show if you want to go watch some of my previous videos talking about him, but he said nearly 90% of people killed during one 5-month period of the U.S. drone program in Afghanistan were not intended targets. Other word for not intended targets are innocent civilians, okay? So 90%, that's not a figure where it's, maybe we get an occasional casualty on the side that we didn't actually intend. 90% to me says that is kind of your intended target, right? How do you keep saying that 90% of the people you're killing are unintended targets? It seems to me at that point that is your intended target and you just simply don't care who you're killing in this process. So it's completely ridiculous statistics like this that show how ineffective our drone programs can actually be. But they continue saying in 2019, the United Nations released a report accusing the U.S. of killing at least 30 Afghan civilians, including 14 children, and violating international humanitarian law with a series of drone strikes in May of that year. And so just to give you a perspective on the people who were killed, I think it's important to put a face to a lot of these numbers. We always talk about the numbers of people who are caught up in U.S. military and interventions and imperialism, but this is what it actually looks like. So 9 killed by U.S. rocket attack today in Kabul. Who are they? So Zemaray, an interpreter; Nazir, an army officer; Zamir, a shopkeeper; Faisal, a student; Farzad, another student; Ayat, a 2-year-old; Sumaya, another 2-year-old; and Armin, a 4-year-old; and Binyamin, a 3-year-old. So these are the things that happen when we continue our U.S. drone program overseas in many of these different countries. Joe Biden is currently bombing Somalia. He is bombing Afghanistan. He is bombing Syria. He is bombing a whole assortment of countries that he has absolutely no business bombing, for one part because the United States military and our intelligence forces obviously cannot distinguish between who is a terrorist and who is, an innocent civilian or a child, apparently. So when that is the case, I think it's time to shut it down and stop pretending as if we have some, ability to decipher in these complex situations. And we have this sort of ridiculous hubris that we have where we can go in and decide who gets to live, who gets to die on some arbitrary grounds. And then, we have military commanders who are coming out right now and won't even admit to the civilians that were killed in this casualty. And they're saying, well, we might do an internal investigation, and we don't know how that's going to play out. So listen, these are the consequences of continued U.S. presence in Afghanistan, whether it's boots on the ground troops, whether it's CIA operatives, whether it's drone strikes, as Biden likes to call them, over the horizon capabilities. This is what it looks like, okay? So, I understand that people would be heated in the moment after U.S. military personnel were killed by ISIS, but you can't have a reactionary response, as Biden clearly has done, and you can't catch innocent civilians in the process. There needs to be full accountability for this, obviously within the military and within the Joe Biden administration himself. These are war crimes. Let's call them what they are. They are straight up war crimes.